The archive is open. Come in out of the cold. Your chair is where you left it, the one by the lamp. Tonight I've pulled something quieter than usual from the shelves. One single night, inside a medieval monastery, from the last candle of evening to the grey bells of dawn. You don't need to remember any of this. There's no test at the end. If you drift, I'll keep reading. Let's begin. It is autumn, somewhere in England or perhaps France. It hardly matters which. The story is much the same on either side of that grey water. About 800 years ago, the light is going the way it goes in that season, less a sunset than a slow withdrawal, the colour leaking out of the fields until they are just shapes again, and the shapes are just dark. At the edge of a forest stands an abbey. Not a ruin, not yet, a working place, walled, busy, warm in patches. Stone walls a little taller than a man on horseback, enclosing what amounts to a small village that happens to prey on a schedule. A church with a tower that can be seen for miles, plain and square against the sky. Orchards, their fruit mostly in by now, apples going into barrels that smell of straw and cut wood. Fish ponds, still as glass in this failing light, holding carp and pike for the days when meat is not allowed on the table. Barns, a brewhouse, a kitchen garden gone brown at the edges, and over all of it, the tower, patient, the one thing in the whole picture that is not going anywhere. Perhaps 200 people live and work inside these walls. There are the choir monks who sing the church services, the offices. They are called 7 or 8 times between one midnight and the next. There are the lay brothers who spend their days in the fields and workshops rather than the choir stalls, milking, threshing, mending fences. There are novices, young men still learning the rhythms of the place, still catching themselves about to speak at the wrong hour. And there are guests, a traveling merchant, a bishop's clerk, a family on pilgrimage, because an abbey like this one is also an inn of a kind for anyone who knocks. What holds all of this together is a small book, not scripture, a rule, written by a monk named Benedict some 600 years before this particular autumn evening, a set of instructions so plain and practical it reads less like religion and more like a schedule pinned to a kitchen wall. When to pray, when to eat, when to work, when to sleep, and for how long. Imagine, if you like, a single sheet of parchment deciding the shape of every hour for 200 people, year after year, and somehow none of them seem to mind. Because the gates must close at night, and because someone must be there when they do, there is a man whose whole work is the threshold. The porter, they call him the doorkeeper. An older man, usually chosen for steadiness rather than speed, given a small lodge built into the wall beside the gate, close enough to hear a hand on the wood before it has finished knocking. He has a stool, a lamp, perhaps a brazier of coals in the cold months. From this little room, he watches the road turn from a road into a shadow, and then into nothing at all, and he does not go to bed the way the others do. His night is only just beginning. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. The rule told the porter exactly how to answer a knock at the gate, any knock from anyone at any hour of the night. He was to say, "Dio gracias, thanks be to God," as if every stranger in the dark were a gift arriving rather than an interruption. The bells for the last office of the day are called Compline, and they ring while there is still the faintest color left in the western sky, a bruise of gray-orange above the tree line. It is a short service, gentle by design, a handful of psalms, a hymn, a blessing, sung by candlelight in a church already mostly shadow. Think of it less as an ending and more as a lid placed carefully over the whole day. The grain ground, the letters copied, the bread baked, all of it folded in now and closed over. At many abbeys, the abbot himself gives the final blessing as the monks file out of the choir stalls. And then, almost at once, something changes in the air of the place. Not a bell, not an announcement, just a settling, the way a house goes quiet when the last person turns off the television. This is the beginning of what the monks call the Great Silence. From this moment until the morning office, no one is to speak, unless there is genuine need, and even then, as briefly as possible. The candles go out one by one as the monks leave, a small brass snuffer moving down the line of them, each little flame collapsing into a thread of smoke, until the church that was full of golden light a few minutes ago is just a dark room with the smell of wax still hanging in it. From the church, the monks walk in a line toward a single long room called the dormitory, though that word makes it sound cozier than it usually was. Rows of straw mattresses on low wooden frames, each monk's spot barely wider than himself, no partitions, no curtains, nothing to call private. Wool blankets, if the abbey is well off, if not, whatever can be found. And in the middle of that long room, the rule insists on one particular thing: a lamp kept burning all night, so the room is never entirely dark. And notice one small thing about the sleeping arrangements. The monks do not undress for bed. They sleep in their habits, the long woolen robes worn all day, belts loosened perhaps, but essentially dressed. Partly this is warmth, since stone buildings in autumn hold the cold the way a cellar does, right down into the bones of the walls. Partly it is modesty, in a room with no privacy to speak of. But there is a third, practical reason, the one that matters most for what comes later this particular night. The bell that wakes them will not wait for anyone to get dressed. Imagine, if you like, lying down not quite the way you would at home, but the way someone lies down who expects to be needed before dawn, not anxious about it, just prepared, glasses kept on the nightstand rather than across the room. So the day is put away now, folded like a piece of linen and set on a shelf, ready to be taken down tomorrow in the exact same shape. The abbey breathes out. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once at nothing and stops. The fish ponds hold their small, unmoving light, and the whole enclosure settles into the part of itself that almost no one from the daylight world ever sees. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Monks slept fully dressed in their habits, partly for warmth and modesty, but also so that when the bell rang in the deep of night, they could rise and walk straight to prayer without fumbling for clothes in the dark. They went to bed the way a firefighter racks their boots, dressed for the night shift. It would be easy to picture the hours after Compline as simply empty, a blank space where nothing happens because no one is talking. But that is not quite right. The silence was a thing the abbey made on purpose, tended on purpose, the way you'd tend a garden rather than leave a field to go wild. It had a shape and rules about where it applied and how strictly. It was work in its own quiet way, the same as the baking or the copying of manuscripts, work done by not doing something rather than by doing it. And yet a place with 200 people in it does not stop needing things just because talking is off the table. Bread still has to be passed at the rare late meal. Water still has to be asked for. A monk copying a manuscript by lamplight still needs to signal that his candle has gone out. So over the generations, monks worked out something rather wonderful in its own modest way. Real, documented systems of hand signs, so a whole conversation's worth of ordinary needs could pass between two people without either one making a sound. Some of these signs survive in old lists, written down like a dictionary. To ask for bread, you'd curl the thumb and forefinger of each hand into a circle, since bread, after all, is round. For water, fingers held flat together, moved sideways like something pouring. It is not a language in the way we usually mean the word. No grammar, no tenses, nothing to tell a story with, but as far as we can tell, it did the job it needed to do. It let the small business of communal life continue after the candles went out, without breaking the quiet the whole night had been built around. On the coldest nights, there was one place a monk might go if the daughter's chill proved too much to sleep through: the warming house, often the only room in the enclosure with a fire in it besides the kitchen and the infirmary. A single hearth, a low room, benches near enough to catch the heat. Not a comfort exactly, more of an allowance, a pressure valve in a life that otherwise asked for a great deal of endurance. A monk with aching hands might slip down there in the deep of the night and simply stand near the fire a while, saying nothing, because there was no one there to say anything to. Meanwhile, the buildings go on with their own kind of nighttime business. In the granary, mice work through the last of the grain dust, unbothered by any rule of silence but their own. Wind finds its way into the cloister, that covered walkway around the central garden, and moves along the stone arches with a sound like something breathing slowly through a long hallway. The fish ponds lie flat and black under whatever moon there is, and somewhere a cat threads along a wall on business of its own. It is a strange, particular kind of quiet, this. Not the quiet of a place that is empty, but the quiet of a place that is full of people who have simply agreed together, night after night, to stop filling the air with words, and to trust that the necessary things will still get said, one way or another, with a hand instead of a voice. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Some monastic sign lexicons that survive run to hundreds of hand signs, and among the solemn signs for psalter and candle, they include a practical sign for asking a brother to pass the beer. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, a bell begins to ring. One man in the dormitory has already woken. It was his whole task tonight, nothing else was asked of him, to surface first out of sleep, find his feet on the cold floor, and pull the bell rope before anyone else stirred. He may have watched a candle burn down to a mark, or simply trusted a body that had learned, over months and years, to wake itself at this hour without being told. Either way, the sound now moving through the dormitory is his doing, and his alone, and in a moment it will belong to everyone. The other brothers rise into the dark and dress by feel, wool over wool, the same habit worn all day now, pulled straight from a body that was only just lying still inside it. There's no washing, no real waking, only the plain business of standing and moving. They file toward a narrow staircase built into the wall, the night stairs, as it's often called, connecting the dormitory directly down into the church. Its whole purpose is small and kind, so that men still half in a dream do not have to cross the open cloister, out under the sky, in the cold, on their way to prayer. A short, private descent, stone underfoot, worn smooth already even this far back in the story, and then the church opens around them. Inside, the light comes from a handful of candles, not many, just enough to find a page or a face, and the rest of the building disappears upward into a dark the candlelight never reaches. This is Matins, the longest of the day's 8 offices, and it falls in the deepest part of the night, when sleep is heaviest and the will is thinnest. The psalms are chanted mostly from memory, because there is barely light enough to read by, and the voices carry a particular texture found at no other hour, thick, low, unhurried, the sound of men singing their way back up out of sleep one line at a time, the way a diver rises slowly so as not to hurt himself. Not everyone makes it all the way up. Here and there a chin drops, a voice trails off mid-verse and does not quite find its way back, and moving quietly along the choir stalls, lantern in hand, is the circator, a monk whose actual assigned duty tonight is to watch for exactly this, and to wake, gently, whichever brother has slipped under. A touch on the shoulder, maybe, or the lantern held close enough that its warmth alone does the work. There's no scolding in it. No brother is shamed for nodding off at 2 in the morning. It was simply understood as weather, something that happened to bodies doing what bodies do in the dark, and the circator's lantern was the quiet correction, offered the same way, night after night. When the office ends, the candles are put out one by one, and the same men climb the same narrow stairs back up to the same beds, to sleep again until the bell for dawn calls them down a second time. The night office sits like a small island in the middle of the dark, prayer surrounded on both sides by sleep, entered and left by the very same stone steps, so that a man might almost dream the whole thing rather than remember it. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. At some abbeys you can still see the night stairs today, and if you look closely at the stone, you'll find the steps worn into soft hollows, curved like spoons, shaped not by any one foot, but by centuries of half-asleep feet taking the same tread down to the same prayers, night after night after night. The hardest task of the monastic night was not staying awake. It was knowing, in a windowless dark with no clock on any wall, what hour it actually was. For most of this period, there was no reliable mechanical way to measure time at all. Nothing you or I would recognize as a clock, nothing ticking anywhere in the whole of the countryside. So the monks built their own instruments out of whatever burned, dripped, or shone, patient devices for a patient kind of watching. A candle marked at intervals along its length with a ring of paint or a notch cut into the wax would burn down hour by hour, and a monk could glance at how far the flame had traveled to know roughly how far the night had traveled with it. Elsewhere, a water clock let a slow, steady drip fill a marked vessel at a knowable pace, hour by hour, drop by drop, the quietest possible machine. On clear nights, certain windows in the dormitory or the church were positioned on purpose so that a watching brother could read the turning of particular stars against the frame, and judge the hour by how far they had swung across the sky since he last looked. And failing all of that, there were the psalms themselves, a chant of known length, sung at a known pace, worked almost like a timer made of memory and breath, something no weather or cloud cover could ever put out. None of this was casual, and getting it wrong had real consequences. Ring matins too early, and you have pulled exhausted men from real sleep for nothing, robbing them of hours they will need again before the day is done. Ring it too late, and the whole rhythm of the house begins to drift, one office nudging into the next, until the day no longer holds its proper shape. So the abbey took on, almost by necessity, a role far larger than its own walls. The surrounding countryside, which had no clocks of its own either, came to set its day by the abbey bells, planting, market, the start and end of labor, all of it loosely keyed to the hours the monastery rang out into the dark, whether or not anyone outside the walls had ever set foot inside them. In a real sense, the monastery was Europe's timekeeper, long before any town had reason or means to build one for itself. And when the first mechanical clocks did finally appear, roughly 700 years ago, it was the monasteries that built them or paid skilled hands to build them. These were ingenious arrangements of weights slowly falling and gears slowly turning, more careful engineering than most people of the time would ever encounter in one place, and their purpose was almost touchingly narrow. Not to tell the hour to a village gathered in the square, not to mark the day for merchants counting out their trade, just to wake one man at one appointed moment so that he could ring the bell that woke everyone else in turn. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Many of the first mechanical clocks in Europe had no face and no hands. They showed the time to no one at all. They existed to do exactly one thing and only one thing, to ring a small bell in the dark, to wake one monk, who would then wake the rest of the world. Not everyone awake in the abbey at this hour is there for prayer. In the infirmary, a lamp is still burning, low but steady. The infirmarian sits beside a brother running a fever, checking on him the way anyone might check on someone they are fond of, and the room around them holds the abbey's whole small pharmacy, most of it grown a short walk away in the infirmary's own herb garden and dried along the rafters. Willow bark steeped in hot water for the ache in a joint or a head. Poppy, used carefully and in small measure to bring on sleep when sleep won't come by itself. Honey, spread plain on a wound, doing quiet work as one of the few dependable antiseptics anyone in this century actually had. The infirmary was one of the rare corners of the abbey where the fire was allowed to burn all night through, and the usual silence was allowed to loosen a little, because a sick man needed warmth, and a voice near him more than he needed the rule observed to the letter. Elsewhere in the dark, a different kind of night work is underway. The porter, whose post is the gate itself, has admitted a traveler after the gates were meant to be shut for the night, and the guest master is up to receive him properly. A bed found, food brought, questions asked gently, or in some cases not asked at all. This happened more often than you might picture, because the abbey was, in effect, the era's inn, its hospital, and its safe house, all held inside the very same walls, under the very same roof. Hospitality wasn't a kindness the house extended when it happened to be convenient. It was written into the rule itself as a duty, owed to strangers the same way prayer was owed to God. And a guest arriving at midnight, cold and unannounced, was to be welcomed as readily and as warmly as one arriving in the full light of noon. Toward the very end of the night, well before any bell announces dawn, the bakehouse wakes first of all, ahead even of the kitchen. Dough that was set the evening before, left to rise slowly through the cold hours, is worked and shaped now and fed into the ovens, so that there will be bread for the community's own tables and bread set aside for alms, for whoever comes hungry to the gate the next day. It's the day's first real warmth, rising through the cold stone before the sky outside has changed color at all, long before anyone else is stirring. And imagine, if you like, the brewhouse not far off, quietly at work too, in its own way just as essential. Beer here was simply the everyday drink, considered safer to hand out than much of the water otherwise available, and part of every brother's ordinary daily allowance, no more remarkable than bread. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Monastery beer was so central to daily life that it was sometimes called liquid bread, and during fasts, when solid food was cut back hard for days at a stretch, it was the daily allowance of beer, brewed by the brothers' own hands in their own brewhouse, that quietly carried the community through until the fast was done. There is one room in this abbey that only works by daylight, and at this hour it stands empty. It is called the Scriptorium Waits, the writing room, and it is where books are made, one letter at a time, by hand. No candle burns in there tonight, and this is not an oversight. Open flame is, as a rule, kept away from the place entirely. Parchment catches. Ink is flammable in its own quiet way, and what sits on those writing desks, months of labor, sometimes a year of one man's patient hours, is simply too precious to risk against a single tipped candle in a drafty room. So the work happens by daylight only, and when daylight ends, the copying simply stops. The pens are set down. The room goes dark and stays that way until morning finds it again. It helps to hold what a book actually was in that room in that century. Not a thing you buy, but a thing you grow. The pages are parchment, animal skin scraped and stretched and dried, and a single volume might use the hides of an entire flock. The ink is ground from oak galls, those strange little growths that form on oak trees, mixed with iron and gum until it turns dark and lasting. And the words themselves are copied, line by line, letter by letter, by one man bent over a desk for as many days as the book is long, sometimes a season, sometimes the better part of a year. A monastery's whole library, its entire book cupboard, might hold fewer volumes than sit on a nightstand today. Each one took a human life's worth of hours to exist at all. Each one, if lost, was simply gone. And yet the men who made them were still, unmistakably, men. Their humanity survives in the margins, in small notes left almost by accident, complaints about cold fingers that will not hold a pen steady, about ink too thin or parchment too rough, about the sheer length of the task before them. At the end of one especially long manuscript, a scribe left behind what is called a colophon, a short note, often just a line, marking that the work is finished. One of the more famous ones, once you set it into plain modern words, amounts to roughly this: "Now I have written the whole thing, for the love of God, someone bring me a drink." It is not irreverence, not quite a joke. It is simply a tired man, at the far end of a very long labor, saying so. Imagine, if you like, that room as it stands right now, desks empty, ink pots capped, unfinished pages held flat under small weights so they do not curl in the night air. Of everywhere in this abbey, the scriptorium may be the quietest, because it is the one place with nothing at all happening in it. The books simply rest on their shelves, unread and unwritten for these few hours, patient the way only paper and skin and old ink can be patient, waiting for someone to come back with the light. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. In the margins of manuscripts that survive from this period, you can sometimes find a short Latin phrase, written over and over in a slightly different hand, probatio penni, a trial of the pen. A scribe, testing a freshly cut quill before starting real work, simply wrote a few words to see if the ink flowed cleanly, the way anyone today might scratch a new pen across a scrap of paper first. Little idle marks, half thought, half habit, meaning almost nothing at all, and yet still there, 800 years later, like someone humming quietly to himself while he works. Somewhere above the church tower, the black of the sky begins, very slowly, to thin into gray. It happens the way it always happens. No line to mark the change. Just less dark than before, and then a little less again, until the shape of the tower is a shape once more, and not simply a deeper patch of night. Into that thinning sky, a bell rings. This is Lauds, Lauds, the office of dawn praise, sung simply because the light is coming back, and the night, whatever it held, is very nearly over. The voices in the choir stalls are steadier now than they were at Matins hours ago. It is easier to sing toward morning than away from it. The night shift begins, gently, to hand the world back. At the gate, the porter lifts the heavy bar he set across the door so many hours before, and the abbey opens outward again, toward the road, toward whoever might already be walking it in this pale, early light. He has been awake the whole night through, the one man in the place whose watch never had a bell to end it, and now his watch simply folds quietly into everyone else's morning. Behind the kitchens, smoke starts to rise from the bakehouse chimney, thin and pale against the grey. Somewhere in the cloister that smoke becomes a smell, bread, plain and warm, drifting into stone corridors that have held nothing but cold air and candlelight until now. Out past the barns, lay brothers pull on boots still stiff from the night and head for the fields, because the animals do not know and do not care what hour the church has just kept. And here is the plain, quiet truth underneath all of it. The bells that rang through this one particular night rang through the night before it, and would ring through the night after, at this abbey and at hundreds like it, for centuries on either side of this single autumn. Different men, mostly, taking their turns at the rope. The same hours, kept in the same dark, by sleepy brothers in wool who rose at the same sound their predecessors rose to, and who would be followed, in their own turn, by others doing exactly the same thing, in the same order, long after their own names were forgotten. Most of those men are long gone now, and so are most of the walls they lived inside. But some of the towers are still standing, out there in the daylight, in fields that have gone quiet in other ways. Some of the bells still hang in them, and a few, here and there, still ring. And the idea underneath all of it, that the night has a shape, that it can be divided into hours, and that someone, somewhere, might choose to stay awake and keep them for everyone else. That idea simply kept going, long after the men who first kept it had gone still and silent themselves. The light is fully grey now over the cloister, easing very slowly towards something warmer. A door opens somewhere. Water is set to heat over coals, and the abbey settles into the ordinary business of a new day, the night already folding itself away behind it, ready, as it always is, to be unfolded again come dark. That's where I'll close the file for tonight. The archive will be here tomorrow. It always is. Sleep well.